Hi, everybody. I can't see everyone's faces. I'm not sure if there's cameras on or off, but welcome to our online launch event for our latest report on misogynoir in the workplace, understanding the experiences of Black women in leadership positions. I'm so excited to be here. It's going to be amazing. So I've got Lesley here with me, I've got Amira, we've got Dr. Dionne, we've got Toby, and we will be having a panel discussion to discuss like experiences of misogynoir. Um, but before we get into the panel, I thought I'd introduce myself. So my name's Serena, and I am a senior researcher here at Runnymede Trust, and I started in May this year. And this Misogynoir project is the first project that I was put on with Lesley, and it's been amazing. It's been challenging, it's been emotional, but it's been so great. And I'm going to pass over to Lesley just to give a quick little introduction if you want to give one of yourself
Oh,
as well.
yeah. Hello, everyone. My name's Lesley Nelson-Addy. I'm an education manager at Runnymede Trust, and I work on various projects, but the main one at the moment is Lit in Colour, as well as this work that we've done with Serena on misogynoir in the workplace. And I will be hosting the conversation with our panelists later.
Amazing. Thanks, Lesley. Okay, so yeah, I've got some slides here that I want to kind of go through with everyone, and it's just going to break down who we interviewed, why we did the research, what we found, and the recommendations that came out of the research. Okay, so firstly, why did we do this research? So in March this year, Frank Hester, who is a Tory donor, spouted the most evil and violent comments about Diane Abbott, claiming that seeing her makes him want to hate all Black women. And some of you may know, but Diane Abbott is one of the longest serving members of Parliament, and that led her to be awarded the Mother of the House, which is an honorific title that is given to the longest serving female. And what Frank Hester's comments like really revealed was the deep individual, institutional, and structural racism that Black women face in the UK. So here at Runnymede, we wanted to do like a rapid response to those words that Frank Hester spouted. So based on this, we reached out to our networks and spoke to 9 different Black women across varying sectors. So we spoke to women from academia, charity, healthcare, union, politics. Um, and yeah, as a Black woman myself at the start of my career, these interviews are like very emotionally challenging. For instance, there was one interview where I started crying, and I can feel that what the participant was saying was like really speaking to me on a deep personal ancestral level. And I kept being like, this is so unprofessional, sorry. But the participant was understanding of the fact that this is a heavy reality that we're living in, and there's so much going on for Black women and Black people in society. But at the same time, it felt very powerful to be speaking to these women about their experiences, and we wanted to send to the voices of the Black women and create a space where they could talk freely. Um, and obviously with this research, there were limitations, obviously, and nothing's perfect. But if we had more time, we would have loved to talk to more women from more sectors. Also, it would have been great to highlight more nuances. So, for example, like being disabled and a queer or geographical nuances, because it was a very London-centric report. Um, and also, it needs to be mentioned that everything in the report cannot be generalized. But what it does bring to light is how Black women are not a monolith, and my experiences are different to Leslie's experiences, are different to Amira's, to Dion's, to Toby's, etc. So I just wanted to highlight those limitations. Okay, so what did we find? So intersecting Blackness and gender in the workplace. So all of the women we spoke to alluded to the pervasiveness of whiteness in the workplace and how it played out in different forms, such as feeling as though they had to prove themselves more so than their white colleagues. And so what I mean by pervasiveness of whiteness is the social construct of whiteness and the customs and norms that come with it and the expectations for others to follow these norms. In addition to this, despite being more than qualified for some positions, career progression is a hard one to say. Career progression was often slower for some of the women. So that was highlighted. Personal impacts of misogynoir. So, as a result of racism and sexism, the women spoke of emotional, physical, and the mental toll that it took on the body. And this was partnered with switching different roles. So, for instance, from employee to mother to friend to partner to dealing with own personal health. For example, one participant highlighted this quote, and I'm going to read it out. I would put it in the chat, but it's a bit too much writing, so I'm going to read it out. And they said, I remember the feeling that no one takes our experiences seriously. When you go to your hospital appointment, you're probably having to fight to be taken seriously. How much extra time does that take? How much toll does it place on your body? When you come home and you're exhausted, and then you have to feed your children, then you have to deal with work, and then you have to deal with a feisty line manager. No one acknowledges that you have to deal with these things or their impact in terms of time and in terms of stress on your body. No one's saying, I understand. And this is not me suggesting special pleading. This is me inviting the question of if we are looking at this through the lens of equality and dare I say democracy, then we should have due regard to the disproportionate impact of everyday life on certain groups, and in this case, Black women. So for me, this quote just really highlights all the different like experiences that Black women can face and all the impact that is having on the body. And especially the quote that really stood out to me was the part was no one saying I understand. So people were feeling like they weren't being listened to, specifically in the workplace as well. So alongside this, some women experience bullying and institutional gaslighting, causing them to not feel psychologically safe, and they had to be hyper vigilant. And I think it's worth noting the term institutional gaslighting. So for me, I'd only come across this through this research because I've heard the term gaslighting, but through like people talking about relationships and things like that. But institutional gaslighting is on an organizational level where an individual is made to feel that information is being hidden, particularly for more junior people. But this can often feel like lead to feelings of confusion or self-doubt or causing the victim to continually question situations. And here's another quote to kind of highlight institutional gaslighting that someone said. So you're constantly overthinking when things don't go right. You're constantly overthinking when you're being challenged, thinking, is it me? Did I do it wrong? Am I
Mhm.
thinking wrong? Am I seeing wrong? Am I imagining things? So I think this is why it's so painful. Okay. So maintaining joy. So despite all of this, the women had conjured up their own coping mechanisms to help them remain resilient in the shape of forming communities, not changing or doubting themselves, and rest. So for instance, one participant said that it's crucial to find your people early on and don't think that you don't belong or that you're not bright enough because you are. And kind of what you've achieved and where you are years later proves that. So don't doubt yourself as much. And they gave you that job for a reason. And I've been in that position before where sometimes it's hard to think that you're always questioning like, why am I here? Do I belong here? But what she's trying to say is definitely don't doubt that. And another participant also noted that systemic change is the only solution to significant change. So why bother changing yourself? Because the problems are way more deep rooted. And I think that was really powerful. And rest, obviously, rest is a superpower, as many people have said, in like especially Black women leader, like thought leadership, how we need to kind of take a step away in order to fight and be resilient and things like that. So those are the findings, but out of the findings, what the concluding remarks were was that the women felt there was a huge lack of understanding of what it means and takes to be a Black woman in British society. So we decided to target the recommendations from the report to employers, trade unions, and the government because they are stakeholders within society that hold a lot of decision-making power, should I say. So we had employers, we want them to do more anti-racist action plans, more line management support. We have trade unions provide more targeted support for Black women so they could hold like quarterly meetings, for example. And so the government is introducing a mandatory ethnicity pay gap, but we want to do more intersectional like research about that. So like what are Black women being paid in comparison to white men, etc. So yeah, those are the recommendations and that those are everything we got from the report. But I want to open the floor up for a bit of discussion. If you guys have any questions about anything or want to speak about your experiences, what like shone through to you. Yeah, thank you. Don't be shy. Also, I think there should be a chat function, so you can use a chat function as well if you need to. Hey, Natalie, I think you've got your hand up. I can't see your face, so maybe unmute yourself. I'm not sure if you're able to hear us.
in the Q&A box, it says that the chat function has been disabled. So
Oh,
perhaps, oh, as well as the mic. So perhaps it's best to just post your comments in through the Q&A. And Ruth
okay, sorry. I
and
can see some of the questions. Okay.
yeah,
It's come up on my side. Will the report be made available to the public? Yeah, so it's already out there in the public. It should be on the Runnymede website, on LinkedIn. I think it's been posted on Instagram and everything. So just check Runnymede socials and they should be there. Um, Ruth, I think what was interesting was the variety of intersections, the mother, the daughter, the employee. Yeah, how important is it for organizations to highlight this? Yeah, good question. I think it's really important for organizations to highlight this because when we turn up to work, we're not just an employee. We have so many different hats and so many different like ways of being. And I think if organizations kind of appreciate that, then we will turn up better to work. And if they're more flexible, and I think um it's important to kind of understand that yeah, like I said, we aren't just workers. So I think it is really important for organizations to highlight the many different intersections of ourselves within the workplace and outside of the workplace. So we've got loads of questions coming through. So someone asked, does Black women include brown women? So we spoke to women only of African and Caribbean descent. I'm trying to see what other questions there are. Did any of the participants speak about being constantly told you are strong? So from what I remember, no one mentioned that exactly, but I suppose women were hyper vigilant. So they always felt like they had to be kind of in this hyper state of awareness because they were really hyper aware of like racism and sexism. So I would argue that hypervigilance is kind of a version of having to be strong because it is a coping mechanism in that sense. But Lesley, I don't know if you want to add anything on that question as well, on that answer.
I was just going to say that we're going to speak about the strong Black woman trope today in the panel discussion with our guests. So we'll definitely explore that idea as well.
Definitely. So someone asked, what is the next stage of this research? As in, where do we go from here? That's a good question. So obviously this has been made public now as well, so it's out there for people to read. But next steps, we want to do so do some targeted kind of workshops for trade unions, for employees, for the government, to kind of speak to them about this research. So we're looking to get some more funding for people. So we want to try and put this out there a bit more, be more front facing. That's the next aims because sometimes it is well and good having research and then just putting it out there, but we actually want to follow it up with the recommendations, especially. So I'm trying to see some of the questions. Is there an official definition of institutional gaslighting? Yeah, there is. And I found that online from, I think it was from like WebMD, and I think there's also been research about institutional gaslighting as well. So you can find that all online. So how about geographically between the four nations, England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland? So yeah, we've realized that is a limitation of this. It was very London centric. So we want to look at the geographical nuances. And will it be in the next steps? And I suppose it will be in the next steps because we will be speaking to government, trade unions, employers, and hopefully we're going to try and speak to those on a like on a more national basis. Okay. So please, yeah, keep the questions coming and I can answer them. I can type some answers. But I think I'll move over to Lesley to start the panel discussion.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Serena, and good evening to everyone again. I was thinking about introducing you all, but actually I want to hand it over to you to introduce yourselves. So starting off with Dr. Dionne Taylor, please introduce yourself to us.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Dr Dionne Taylor. I'm an Associate Professor of Sociology and Black Studies at Birmingham City University. The report resonates with me so much, and the reason why it does is because, one, as a Black woman within higher education, but also the research that I've done and continue to do is very much around this area. So I'll leave that as an introduction.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'd like to pass over to Amira Campbell, please.
Hi, yeah, thank you, Dr. Lesley. So yeah, I'm Amira Campbell, pronouns she, her. This report, I think it was a hard read, but also a really promising one. And yeah, really resonated in so many senses, but also some of the intersectional issues that it was talking about were things that I found really interesting, particularly as someone early in their career, but in a very senior role at the same time. So yeah, thank you.
Tell us about that role, Amira. Tell us.
So I'm the president of the National Union of Students, and got into this role about 5 years ago before previously actually being the president at Birmingham Student Union. So lots of student politics-esque work.
Thank you. And to pass on to Tobi Oredein.
Hi, my name's Serena. Thank you to Runnymede Trust for having me and having this discussion and for doing the research, I should say, before I get into anything. I'm the founder and CEO of Black Ballad. Black Ballad is a media membership platform for and by Black women. We create content, events, we collect our own data actually, and then we have partnerships all about helping Black women live their best life on their own terms, on their own terms. And like everyone, it is a really, you know, it's a hard read, but it's a very real read. Unfortunately, it's a very relatable read. That's the word I was looking for. I think it was very relatable. I know it's women in leadership, but I think wherever you are as a Black woman in your career, I think you've probably had some of these conversations and experiences. So it was a very relatable read, actually. So yeah.
Thank you all so much for being here, for introducing yourselves so beautifully. And I also just want to make the point that these three women, as they've introduced themselves, have only shared but a part of the amazing accomplishments that they have achieved until this point. It's a great honor to be having this discussion, and please keep your questions coming, as was said earlier. And the hope is that this discussion, although as Tobi has shared already, it being really relatable, we also hope that you will feel hopeful and empowered for the future of Black women's experiences in the workplace. Now, all of you guys have mentioned that the report had some kind of personal resonances for you. What instances of misogynoir came to mind that you don't mind sharing this evening? It's open to the floor, so whoever wants to speak. Maybe we'll start with Amira first.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to start off. So yeah, this report was a really challenging read, and it definitely, so much of it really resonated and felt very personal. I mean, firstly, and like, I think the report at the beginning sort of poses some questions in terms of like what strategies and resources have Black women utilized to create and retain strength and joy, despite so many of these decisions, for so many of these conditions. And it struck me how quite early in my career, of course, and hosting quite a senior role, how much of this I had experienced, but also how sort of my tools for resistance were far behind and almost chasing the pressures that I'm undergoing within this role and the things and the conditions that I exist in. Sort of being 22 years old, but being a president of a major organization, like this is, the two feel incoherent. And so, I mean, firstly, I feel lost. The paper talks about how many Black women are building communities through sort of like racialized staff groups or just like racialized working communities, et cetera, et cetera. And like, we're still at the beginning of building those structures here at NUS, and we lose people. And so I felt a deep loss reading that because I went, but that doesn't exist where I am in the space that I am, and that tool is missing. And then obviously, like, sort of, I mean, I was reading it and I felt so much frustration, right? Because in some sense, like the ways that many of my actions are politicized. I mean, one of the things that we faced was me wanting to be in racialized spaces while also being in a position of power, whilst also being sort of a governing body of this same organization that I worked for, meant that being in a racialized staff group was conceived and perceived as illegitimate lobbying for racialized staff in the organization towards me. And that was a really challenging thing to have to reckon with. And go, well, if within this space and in this role, I can't do work or be in spaces with racialized staff without it being conceived as some kind of unfair advantage to our most marginalized communities, that really rocks me and was something that I didn't have the tools to deal with yet and had to work out on the way. And then I think the thing that I reckon with most is, I guess, the duty to pass this baton on, but without at the without at the detriment of myself. And I mean, we have a long history of Black women being in my role here at the National Union of Students. So my predecessor, Larissa Kennedy, who's been an absolute legend to me, was one of the previous leaders. We've had people like Zamzam Ibrahim, Shakira Martin. We've had Black women leading NUS for almost a decade now straight, or women of color at least, which is absolutely incredible and is amazing. But it also means that almost inevitably, the next person in my role will very likely face some kind of marginalization or be from a marginalized background. And so I have a responsibility to make this organization that bit more suited to prop them up and not tear them down. But also I need to not tie myself and my worth in this role to my productivity to deliver that. And because we're in a place where work is inherently exploitative, and as I wear this title and how I do this work and how I do it, is really, really important. I had a really interesting conversation with one of my colleagues who was like, are you wearing this role in a way that if a single mother studying nursing was looking at you would go, I can't do that job, you know? And like, how do I wear this role? How do I wear this title? And could I feel genuinely, honestly able to sit down with that individual and say, you can do this role and it's accessible to you? And for so long, NUS has been the sort of feeder organization to politicians and to parliament. And we are used to the sort of, I don't know, the 20-year-old young white man, generally speaking, young student politician, studied PPE of some form or history or something like that, right? Doesn't have a child, doesn't have those same commitments and is willing to do a 70-hour-a-week job being the NUS president or the vice president or whatever role. And so the onus of productivity within the student movement and within student politics is very, very strong, but will always be the most cruel to our most marginalized and our most vulnerable, and will be the Achilles heel in us actually achieving as a movement what we seek to. And so reading that report sort of threefold, the sort of loss that I felt of people in our spaces, the sort of frustration in terms of how I'm politicized by virtue of my racialization, but then also that sort of conversation about rest, and how we make that work in a way that actually rest is not just an accessibility piece, but is actually key to making our movement work and to making student politics truly what it needs to be.
Thank you. And Dionne, what would you say? Do you need me to, shall I repeat
Sorry,
the
I was
question?
no, I heard.
Oh, okay.
I
Great.
was actually looking for a book which I was going to recommend to everyone. I'll find that. But in terms of, firstly, being within academia and choosing a subject, like looking at the representations of Black British women, I couldn't have had a PhD that was closer to home more than what I actually did. So it was very much around my experiences and women like me's experiences and similar. That came with a lot of hardships. One, firstly, people within other Black people, and it's a shame that it was, so that the research wasn't valid. It didn't have any substance to it. So in order, and if you add to that, having to justify and actually say, well, and this came from white supervisors saying, well, why don't you look at white women when I'm looking at Black British women? So my PhD research was a starting point where it became it was painful. I describe it as a tumultuous experience because, as I said, the starting point of almost having to justify, first of all, if you're looking at something where you're looking at dichotomies and binaries around good, bad, strong, weak, and then you're looking at this in terms of your own research. So it's that as a starting point, as I said. Then working within on the Black Studies course. So I lead the Masters in Black Studies, and I have students who have not necessarily, they don't have the same struggles once they're here, but they've come with the load of being told that they're not good enough, or their ideas are not valid, or it's not worthy of research, or even their ideas, as I said, are not taken seriously, or not explored, or not allowed to be explored. So to me, it's worked multiply in terms of how I've experienced it, how my students experience it, and that doesn't even get into within the workplace of some of the things I've had. Blatant racism, I've had it as more covert. um it's insidious. That's the way I would describe what my experiences have been. And but that's not to say that it's all been bad. I've had a lot to celebrate, and there's, I can happily say that all of my students this year on the master's program are graduating with distinctions. That is at least 7 Black women who are leaving with distinctions. Now, I should be getting some claps in here right now.
Clapping, we're
They,
clapping.
they have looked at issues, they've looked at things that are really important to them. Now, tell me elsewhere where that's happening. So there are things to celebrate. There's a lot more celebrations, but in terms of, as I said, where I started, in terms of the struggles and still having to endure it, and to where, as I said, when we had our assessment boards and seeing how well my students did, I was like, yes, it is worth it. The fight to continue, because it's not easy. Because, as I said, I experience it, my students experience it, and it's an ongoing battle. So I hope I've answered your questions in terms of the experiences. I can say more, but I'll leave it because I know we've got some other questions.
No, you absolutely have. Thank you for sharing that. And we are definitely celebrating you and your students for that fantastic achievement. And Tobi, please, what kind of stood out to you? What personal experiences of Misogynoir came to mind?
Yeah, so I mean, my career is, I started in journalism, and I was, I wanted to be a journalist. That was all I ever dreamed of. But around the time I graduated and I was trying to get a job in journalism, there was the City University statistic that came out that Black journalists only make up 0.2% of journalists in the UK, and white journalists make up 94%. And then if you add in I can't remember what the stat was between like women and men, more men made up journalists than women. So if you put those two things together, well, where did that leave Black women? At the time, I was trying to get a full-time job. I was constantly rejected. I've said it so many times that, every time I looked at who got a job, it was thin, white, able-bodied women. And, in 2011, terms like misogynoir, microaggressions weren't common words in our dialect and everyday language. So I knew something was wrong, but I didn't have the words to express it. And I was in my early 20s. So I could see misogynoir happening in front of me, but I didn't know quite what it was. And then when I was working as a freelancer, my first time job, I remember I was a most junior member of staff, and I remember being there for like nearly like a year. And it sounds really not petty, but never being invited to go to lunch. And I remember I used to sit on the features desk as a writer, and there was this guy, first time in the office, been there first day, white guy, asked to go to lunch. And it's kind of there it is in terms of how Misogynoir works, in terms of you're not in, you know, I always say to people, decisions of who's getting a promotion or getting this next job, they don't happen in the office. They happen at the dinner table. They happen in a social setting, and Misogynoir blocks you out of those environments. And I think that's when I was like, okay, I'm not invited to the lunch table, and I get it. You know, the white guy is, but me, who's been here for a year, who's been transcribing everybody's stuff, stays late, comes in early, I'm not invited. And I think that was my first clearest example of Misogynoir, then adding not being able to get a full-time job like after that experience. So those are like my first taste of Misogynoir. But I think the one that sprang to mind actually happened a few months ago. You know, Black Ballad, I work with majority Black women and majority Black women, and there's a Black guy and Black man in our team. And I kind of thought in Black Ballad, I kind of escaped whiteness in the workplace, but that is not true. In order for Black Ballad to run, we have to do partnerships, we have to work with brands, and decision makers are usually white men and women. We had this campaign recently, it was about motherhood. And every week I have a status update of what we're doing in the campaign, how's it going? And I was the only Black woman in this call. And up until this point, doing partnerships have run fairly smoothly. There's a level of respect there because I think people know what Black Ballad is, kind of how I present myself online, that, you know, if I've got something to say, I'll say it. So usually I'm kind of, I would say, safe in these circles. And we were talking about an article that's going to be on Black Ballad. And if anyone's a mum here, I was talking about patch testing, that like we had to write about, if we're going to use this product, it has to be patch tested. And I'd never seen so many white women shout over me and be like, that's not true, that's not true. But the ironic thing is, there were 6 of us on that call and I was the only mum on the call. I was the only one that had a child. And all these white women were telling me I was wrong. And I was like, if I was a white woman, you would all say that that's right. You would all say that has to be in the article. But my Blackness stops them from even seeing me as a mother. And it also stopped them giving me the level of respect that I deserved in that call, because there's no way I can be on a meeting and shout over someone. There's no way, even team members in my staff, like in terms of if you're talking to someone like that, I will say it's unacceptable. So it was really interesting because obviously there's the mother that's speaking in the report, but it was where my two worlds of work and motherhood collided, and my Blackness stripped me of both my identities in that meeting. And I literally remember getting off the call and saying to my team, I will never work with that brand again. There's no matter how much money is in the world, I can never work with that brand again, because you don't respect me as a colleague. But for me anyways, most importantly is, you don't respect me as a mother, because I'm the only one that has children on that call. So that's interestingly the first time I've had Misogynoir so blatantly in my face as leadership. But as I said, I work with an all Black team. And obviously Misogynoir can come from anyone, but my team's not crazy. So like I work with people who are fighting against Misogynoir. So that's kind of the first experience that I actually had in leadership. But in terms of my like starting my career, it was riddled with it. So yeah.
Wow, I think the thing that I think is kind of striking me about what all 3 of you have said is the cost of Misogynoir on yourselves and on your trajectory. I think about particularly with what you're saying there, Tobi, in terms of, if this brand ever call me again, no matter how much they're going to pay me, I'm not taking them on. And I feel that's a cost. That's a cost that's being paid in that moment. And again, like you say, Amira, in terms of the communities that you're trying to form in order to create a legacy for future people who occupy the role that you're taking on, that's a cost to you, holding that burden to kind of start that on. And I cannot imagine what it took you, Dr. Dionne, to support your students, to where they are now. And we're just speaking about this year where all of them are graduating with distinctions, but there would have been years prior where that journey was a necessary one. So I think, yeah, just this idea of cost is really coming through there. I'm going to start with Dr. Dionne, please. A few of the women expressed frustration with the number of research projects that have been conducted to investigate Black women's experiences. Even though we have a lot of data to illustrate the challenges that Black women face, why is it still important to conduct this research within our communities? And how can we find the balance between seeking answers and resolving issues? Is it even our responsibility to resolve issues?
Thank you, Dr. Lesley. I just want to make sure we get that, Dr. Lesley. I know we can read it, but just saying it. Thank you, and thank you to others, Amira and Tobi as well, and Serena. Okay, shouting out everyone here. An important piece of work that you've done, really, really important. But looking at some of the comments, the questions are, has it been? What's going to be done now? And I know, Serena, you addressed this at the beginning. So because some of the research that has been done already, it confirms, it validates our experiences, but sometimes, and I'm sure Toby can attest to this, is previously you will be told, where's the data for this, where's the evidence in terms of that there is a need for an online Black women's magazine, or that Black women are going to pay for membership, or that so we need data to almost justify our existence, to know what our experiences are, but also to see distance traveled, because we know it's stark, we know there are a lot of disparities, but if we don't have the numbers to kind of confirm what the experiences are, and we don't have the empirical research there, we can't. It makes it that much more challenging for us, doesn't it? So, but it also helps us to give a kind of contextually relevant understanding of where we're at, where we need to be. I advocate for intersectional data. Note, I'm not saying intersectionality stems from Black feminism, and people frustrate me when they keep conflating the two. There are two different things, but intersectional research. And again, Serena mentioned around some of the challenges in terms of, there's in the report we've looked at gender, sexism, but there are things around location, ageism, colorism even. These things really do impact disabilities. It could be even, as I said, regional differences, and I think that was a point that was made, that really do impact on the outcomes and experiences of women. So that the data is needed to capture exactly what I've just said, but also in terms of, and you will know this, in terms of policy and advocacy, you need it in terms of to actually say, look, this is the issue, these are the solutions, in terms of the next part of your question, but also the visibility and representation, really, really key. We need to have that kind of continued research, because so much of my work is looking for it's just not there, or if it is, it's the same old, research that's been written about us, not by us and not for us. So it's not using the appropriate methodological tools in terms of that are culturally relevant. They're not culturally adapted to actually understand some of our experiences. So we might have the stats, but we don't necessarily have the understanding of how we've come to some of the conclusions. But in terms of this, then helps us to become action orientated, not moving it just from, okay, saying exactly, and this is why I love the recommendations, but I would go one step further in saying, you talk about anti-racism plans, but we need, specifically for this research, which looks at misogynoir, anti-blackness. There's something specifically about not so, and I support Serena in terms of saying it wasn't looking at Black and brown people, it was looking at Black women. Let's be really, really clear and specific, because there are distinctions. As I mentioned, it could even be around colorism, ethnic, like different. While it's written about African and Caribbean women, you know, there's even, once we go into, there's different variations and nuances, and research allows us to look within those and doesn't just say, look, Black women are this monolith. We're not. I'm fed up of it, sure. You know, let's stop having and doing that. Let's make sure that we're really clear and able to find and disaggregate the data. It's really important to not just have this aggregated, conflated data, but we disaggregate it so we know exactly, so we can have more answers and solutions. And this will help us to translate the research into practice, you know, and policy, which I know is a key thing. And also this continuous feedback loop. So, you know, even I know the research was a rapid response, but even our positionalities, you know, of the women that you spoke to, if you spoke to women in other sectors who are kind of maybe mid-career, not kind of leadership, you might get different responses. So that consistent feedback loop, such as what we're doing right now in terms of the forums open to ask the questions, really important. Okay, I'll finish there.
Powerful, powerful points made. Absolutely. The more specific we get, the more appropriate our actions, our corresponding actions will be for the communities. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Dionne. And Tobi, I wanted to turn to you and say that women we spoke to often referenced feeling weighed down by an extreme pressure to meet expectations at work. And I think Serena honed in on that in her presentation as well, feeling as though they didn't want to make mistakes, feeling inadequate in their attempts to excel. What strategies or resources can Black women use to create and retain strength, and joy despite these conditions? And how can we liberate ourselves from the strong Black woman trope?
Thank you. One of the things that I always tell Black women in the workplace is actually to find your community. I think it's very important that you are able to have I would say a Black woman, personally, another Black woman, if you can find her, or someone who's going to be able to understand and let you release that emotion, and that kind of shreds you of that strong Black woman. I don't want to say armor because it's not protecting us half the time, but that suit that we have to put on every single day to get through the day. I would definitely say finding your community is really, really important. I can't stress it enough, actually, because I think what community does, it helps you fight back against the institutional gaslighting, because often what Misogynoir can do is kind of like, did I imagine it? Was it real? Maybe I'm overthinking it. And what your community, or I've found anyways, having the right community can help you validate your experiences. It can help you think through, and it can also help you think through the mechanisms that you can use to cope or combat the misogynoir that comes towards you. So I definitely say finding your community. I think it's also about having boundaries in the workplace. I think one thing that I found really not interesting, but I felt that like this pressure to overperform. And I think misogynoir forces us to overperform. It forces us to not have as many boundaries in the workplace. So I feel like a lot of Black women is like, we'll be first in the office, we'll work late, we'll go the extra mile because we've been told we have to work twice as hard, 10 times as hard. But then that's really, really damaging to our health, physically, emotionally, mentally. It stops us actually escaping the office and having some reprieve from the things that we're battling. So I would definitely say having our boundaries is really, really important as like Black women who are battling misogyny in the workplace. And I know this sounds I'd actually say keep a record of things, write down things. I can't stress how important it is to write down your experiences, to date and log it, just in case you want to take it further, but also for your own, I would say for your own like memory, to see the patterns, to see who is doing it, what happened in that conversation, it's happened again. Okay, like this is actually becoming a pattern, because sometimes, as I said, that gaslighting makes us doubt our own memory. And I think if you have it written down and you're like, actually, you know what? This has happened once, twice, a third time. To yourself, you can say, you know what? No, I'm not going crazy. You know what? This is true. But then also, if you decide to take it a step further, if you want to like push back, you can say, well, you know what? I have all of this written down. This is what's happened at that time. Like, I purposely came away from the conversation and made note of it. So like this did happen. So I'd say those definitely my three things: community, boundaries, and write things down.
Genuinely, I want to double down on write things down. That was so powerful, Tobi. Thank you so much. I think one of the things with this report, as Serena shared, is that the intention was to really investigate following what Frank Hester had said about Right Honourable Diane Abbott. But I think what I want us to do in this discussion is just spend a bit of time speaking to how Diane Abbott's journey has influenced you in your chosen fields. I know that she's just recently published her memoir as well. But if, as you were, going on your journey, in what ways has she inspired you to excel? And this is open to the floor, so anyone is welcome to answer.
So, I was going to say, quickly, I have read Diane's memoir, and it was really impactful. I actually listened to it, and I listened to it alongside my 15-year-old daughter, and if someone who's who knows a little bit about misogynoir and things just from some of the work that I've done, but in terms of just seeing the struggles, seeing the overt racism that she's experienced, and while I would like to say my experiences haven't been as stark as her to date, what I can say is again, I'll go back to this: representation has been important throughout my life, and as I said, being a mother and seeing my daughter, I'm represent for her as well. So in terms of my own career, I'm still, as I said, the struggle's real. Struggle's real, and every single day I have to put on something around me when I come into the building where I am now, just to prepare myself for dealing with microaggressions, insults, different things that you get. And what I learned from listening and seeing Diane Abbott and other influential women is, don't give up. As hard as it is, and the struggles and my experiences affected my physical health. I've been impacted by it, so it's not to say that I haven't, but when I've been down, as Tobi said, you find your community. I call on the ancestors in terms of bringing that strength. That there's certain things that I've had to do to prepare myself and gear myself up, and I think it's really important that we don't give up, because we matter in terms of the positions that we're in, because there are younger generations, like what Amira spoke to, and people coming up, and we have to pass the baton on. And I think that's something that came through in the memoir. So
yeah, thank you. Amira, it looked like you wanted to share your experiences too.
Yeah, I mean, so especially like within obviously being in politics in that sense, like politics is not flattering. Like, I don't know, especially growing up, like it's not cool to be a politician, particularly amongst marginalized communities. Like that's, if anything, like they're very much viewed as the holders of oppression, like the hosts. And in many senses they are. And what I think Di Abbott did for a lot of us is make it that bit more flattering. She wears it kind of coolly. And particularly being based in Hackney, which was like not far from where I was growing up, et cetera, et cetera. Diane Abbott has worn it in a very cool way for a long time. And so she holds that beacon of going, you can be in this space and do something in a way where you're not detached from your community, you know, you're not automatically corrupted by power, you know, you can still be in touch with charitable work, and you can genuinely be in this space trying to do something good. And so I think for me, there's a real extra resonance, particularly when we're in spaces where like it's difficult, right? Like we see often politicians, particularly, and there is a reality. Not every marginalized person in politics wears it flatteringly at all. There is this image of sort of often, you know, as a person of color, if you enter that space, you'll be corrupted, and therefore you can often be actually more detrimental than your white counterparts in how you become the host of messaging that's deeply, deeply impactful to the community that you belong to. I'm not going to talk about the leadership of the Tory party right now. But in that very sense, I think what Diane Abbott did for so many of us who would never have traditionally thought or considered, who probably faced their own families wincing at the idea of them being in politics, she made it that bit more flattering and that bit more possible to step into.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. Toby, is it okay if we move on, or did you?
Oh, no, feel free.
It's okay. Yeah, just because I'm mindful of time and we literally have 6 minutes before we open up to the Q&A. So in the report, we suggested a number of recommendations for employers, trade unionists and government to consider. In light of your own sector, what one change do you believe ought to be made imminently to improve the experiences of Black women within that space? So I'd pass it on to Toby first of all, and then we'll go to Dr. Dionne, and Amira, I'll end with your final question. Okay.
I think like I don't think it's Black women's responsibility to do this work. I actually don't, but I do believe we have to do it to be part of the conversation. When Dionne was talking earlier about research, one of the things that I think is a testament to the work that she does is that before, research wasn't done by us. There's a level of care that needs to be done when you're doing this work, because sometimes we can be subjected to misogynoir while doing even this research. Like I remember when I started Black Ballad, like the professor of Black Studies did not look like Dionne when I was doing this. Like I actually know her name. Like that had like did stuff about Black Tudors when I was starting in 2014. Like she was the face of Black Studies academia. So, you know, we kind of do have to be part of the research and be part of the solution, even though it's not our responsibility to do so. So I believe we should be financially compensated for it very, very well. Like I think one of the things is we take on this labor and we're expected to do it alongside our jobs, and you know, at this work at the same rate, and it's just not fair. Like I think we need to be compensated better to do that work. So I feel that if Black women are going to be doing this, I think we need to be compensated properly, because it is very, very, very emotionally draining, and therapy is very expensive. So if you want us to do this work and we need to be able to have an outlet, or like we need to be compensated for it, or put things in place, like in terms of employees need to understand that, you know, when you're taking on Black women and you're going through like the workplace, we need a level of healthcare that our other counterparts don't need, in terms of like to get through the day. Like you can have all these benefits that you want, but maybe putting in place like some sort of like, you know, add on for like therapy and like, you know, rooms where we can kind of take a minute, like it can be really, really beneficial to Black women's mental health and help them to keep going in terms of, I hate saying fighting the good fight, but you know, we know what I'm saying. But so I definitely believe in being part of the conversation and having Black women at the forefront, because we want to make sure that, you know, when these issues are not being tackled, that misogynoir isn't even still in it. So Black women do have to be there. They have to be leading the charge. They have to be having that voice, but they've got to be compensated financially for it, because it's just not right. And as I said, therapy is very expensive, so they can afford that therapy, or you need to put stuff in place so we can access therapy, because it's very expensive. So those are kind of where my head was at when I was like reading the report for those suggestions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that point. And that is extended to participants involved in the research too, compensated financially, properly in those experiences. Dr. Dionne, please.
I'm just going to whiz through a few. Okay. So firstly, especially within education, there was a big and has been a big emphasis on gender pay gap. What about the ethnicity pay gap? Just putting it out there. But then this also fits within many universities and in higher education, in education generally. We also have something called an ethnicity awarding gap, which is the disparities of Black and other global majority students getting disproportionately worse outcomes, less 2-1s, first classifications. These are structural issues. For me, these are social justice issues that need to be addressed. I've got a few more, hold on. Right. Flexible working culture. We need to have the flexibility to not always be formative. Stop having meeting for meeting's sake. Let's cut out some of those things. This performance culture as well. It impacts negatively on, you know, even this notion of perfectionism, evidence. And I'm going back in terms of the education sector, extenuating circumstances. Why are you making people get death certificates, you know, during COVID around losing family relatives, or not realizing that, you know, our auntie's cousin is also part of our family, and our grieving process isn't just limited and shouldn't be limited to 3 days. Okay. Make professional development available to Black women, and that professional development also could come in the forms of make places culturally safe. So professional therapy, knowing that the labor that we have, you know, getting those students from, you know, to undo some of the psychological trauma that they've experienced, to get them to feel confident. It takes a lot of work, and who bears the brunt? Who is taking the toll? This could also come in the form of conferences and training. Fund some of our work. Fund all of our work, of course. I'll leave it at that, but hopefully some of those recommendations are helpful.
Gosh, I'm still writing furiously all these points. Goodness me. Really, really powerful. I think the thing that's important about what you shared is that there's things that the sector need to do, but then there's things that need to be done for the individuals as well. And I think that yeah, I feel like things just feel like they're moving not fast enough, basically. I think is the
just
point.
one more, and I mentioned it
Yeah.
before, but not just have anti-racist plans, have specifically anti-Blackness, but let's specifically mention things around misogynoir, because we have, as I said right at the beginning, we have Athena Swan agendas, but there's, you know, we can put in let's say misogynoir around anti-Blackness or hatred towards and dislike towards Black women specifically.
Yeah, powerful. And Amira, this is kind of speaking to your idea around recommendations for young Black women. So in the report, most of the women felt as though their career path had a number of obstacles, like senior staff members intercepting opportunities that could lead to promotion, or delayed performance reviews, so the women were completing work that exceeded their role and pay for an extensive period of time. One participant responded to this by moving from one workplace to another, while another participant remained and fought from within. What can employers do to make the career trajectory for young Black women more seamless? And how can tertiary education providers support young Black women with this transition?
Thank you for asking this question, because so much of that, and actually also thank you to Tobi and Dr. Dionne for everything that you guys just added, because it really, really, really resonated. To touch first on tertiary education, so much. Yeah, as Dr. Dionne actually alluded to, a lot of our focus in our sector is around social mobility and less so on social justice. And so we're often, and I mean, often still behind on that social mobility work, but it's often get the people into the institution and not actually think about the journey across sort of to the end of it, right? So yeah, there's the stuff around awarding gaps, and there is the stuff around pay gaps. I remember being at Birmingham, and they basically didn't have sufficient data, so the number of enough Black women to do intersectional pay gap analysis between gender and ethnicity. And we're talking about one of the biggest university. I mean, it's got 6,000 staff in it, right? We're talking about one of the biggest biggest university campuses. So when it comes to tertiary education, that social mobility piece needs to be beyond just universities. Particularly in England, there's an opportunity to actually connect up with colleges, to actually connect up with people in sort of that post-16 space, because we often find our most marginalized students are the ones at colleges, et cetera, and actually not getting into university. So there is that social mobility piece, but then there's also the social justice piece. And I think what we find is, whilst universities claim often to be the sort of sector leaders, the forward thinkers, they've got some of the most incredible thinkers in their institutions, the most incredible academics. Often in terms of the action that universities are willing to take in terms of their impact nationally and internationally, the spaces for taking risks or for being bold don't reside in supporting people of color in their institutions. And I mean this in the sense of, right now, one of the biggest topics for conversation around migration, right? For their own benefit, frankly, even if we weren't to think about this from a social justice perspective, there's a real role that universities ought to be having, and a piece that they should be saying and speaking out to loudly and boldly, and instead choose to be the sort of compliance institutions for the government. And so I'm in a place where I'm sitting down having conversations, particularly with sort of Nigerian and Ghanaian women studying in our institutions, who are at fear of deportation and don't feel like their own institutions have their back. So I think there's a real piece about how bold and confident our institutions choose to be in supporting our most marginalized students, who often tend to be victims of misogynoir. But then there's also about what role our institutions play in changing culture, and particularly culture around reporting, and actually making it not feel like this massive barrier, this massive step, making it not feel like if you report this, it has to escalate this way or it will not go anywhere. And like the whole weight behind reporting in tertiary education is far too much for so many. I think there's something I was on a talk actually in October, talking about the idea of like sort of castle walls at universities. And this doesn't apply to all universities, but Dionne will know this. At the University of Birmingham, they're called obviously the University of Birmingham, right? And then at BCU, one of their sort of slogans is the University for Birmingham, right? An absolute dig on an institution that, generally speaking, has had its castle walls a bit too high and has failed to allow the community into its spaces. So there are so many things that tertiary education could do to tackle these really big structural issues that would have very tangible effects for Black women as individuals in these institutions. And then I think there's something on how much does tertiary education actually shape the norms for what you expect when you enter a workplace, right? And for so many of us, if we're used to being neglected, if we're used to not seeing our supervisor or et cetera, as that support base, if we're used to not feeling like we can report honestly, if we've had years and years of training for whatever career we're going into that tells us what the guidelines for how to be appropriate in that space are, and they aren't fit for purpose, we will continue to allow ourselves to be treated terribly, to be gaslit, to experience all of the things that everyone has been talking about. So there's something about how tertiary education actually shapes the way that we expect to be treated in the workplace, and how as employers, we have a responsibility to undo some of that work, but also about how if we partner up with tertiary education, we can begin to shift the overall dial.
Absolutely. It's an important place, an important space, sorry, to influence change. Absolutely agree with that. Okay, so first of all, thank you to all the panelists for everything that you shared. the part of the conversation where I'm kind of leading with the questions has come to an end now. So I'm looking over to the questions in the Q&A box. I think there are, it's quite overwhelming. There's hundreds of questions. Thank you, everyone. And I know Serena's been working really hard in the background to answer some of your questions through typing as well. Someone's asked quite a long question, but I think it's an important one. A point was made earlier about us prioritizing. I think this is to Dionne, sorry, I just want to make sure that's clear. A point was made earlier about us prioritizing our health and not always going above and beyond. I'm in the second half of my PhD and have taken on more teaching, RA and other roles than other PhD candidates, as I know that as a Black British Caribbean woman, I will need to be exceptional to land one of the few lecturing roles available post-PhD. I don't have the luxury to be unemployed after I finish. How would you suggest balancing my mental health, but also putting myself in the best position for employment?
Ooh, I can empathize, just put it that way. I can empathize. It's not easy. But if there are other Black women or people who I don't want to say allies, but people who you can trust in terms of sharing, talking about some of your experiences, and also be quite bold in terms of what you want. So you've put it here that you're looking for a lecturing job. Let us know who you are. If any opportunities come up, we will, everyone will look out for each other. So it's about building community as well, because often we feel very isolated. And as I said, share, write to Tobi, write to Amira, and just let them know, some of the things that you want to get into. And but in terms of looking after your mental health, it's a fine balance, because especially when you're in academia and you can feel very isolated, especially depending on what your topic is, it can be quite challenging. In terms of tips, I enjoyed reading fiction. In terms of I listen to my music. So these headphones, often people, I share a shared office, I sit at the back, and I was listening to some Kendrick Lamar, GNX, I'll be listening to my Beres Hammond. These are the things that keep me good even in this space, and Mary J. Blige, all the other, not just shouting at the men, but I listen to my music as well to help me. I listen to podcasts, when I'm here. Sometimes I just have my headphones and I'm walking around the building, because, as I said, it also helps me to create a bit of armor. I and this is going to sound like a luxury, but I have been to the Caribbean a few times this year. But that's also helped me to stay sane when I'm coming back to the workplace. So to me, just connecting with, I'd say, my roots, my people, but it's finding, people within the workplace. I have other Black women. I have some people who would call friends within the workplace. Not everybody in the workplace is your friend. So let's put that out there. But there are, and the saying is, you don't to say all your business to people within your workplace, but there will be a few, and they also, can help you within the workplace to feel safe. But as I said, sharing, being really clear in terms of what it is that you want at the end in terms of a job. And you're right, being unemployed is not we don't have the luxury of doing that. But even before I started lecturing, I was doing a PGCE, which is a postgraduate teaching course. I did a bit of volunteering, not for too long, because as I said, I had a child I needed to but that helped me. So as I said, sometimes it might be just little things where you can get yourself in, and that may help as well.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Dionne. Amy has said that this has been so necessary. Thank you. Does anyone have experience of or advice on the process of undoing internalized misogynoir? For example, allowing yourself to take up space, not contort yourself, and show up fully. Does anyone want to answer this? Tobi's nodding. Tobi, do you want to go ahead?
Okay. Before I forget, I want to say thank you to Amira and Dr. Dionne for your contributions. I think like everything you said has been so necessary, and it's very, I've done a panel like this in a long time, so I want to say I'm very proud to be part of this panel for you, with you both. I think in terms of undoing misogynoir, I think also as Black women, we need to look at ourselves as well as a starting point in terms of what have we been taught and what do we need to unlearn before we take up room and space. One of the things that people used to actually say to me at Black Ballad when we first started, I purposely used to only post dark-skinned Black women. And people were like, oh, like people started to notice. And I was like, because like, even like my idea of what a Black woman who was valid to be seen wasn't necessarily someone of my shade. And colorism is a big part of misogynoir, let's be very, very honest. So like you have to really do the work on yourself and internally and your thoughts before you can like start doing it publicly. So I'll definitely say, first of all, what are some of the things that you think about in terms of how you see other Black women and stuff like that? So I'd say that. I think one thing I would say is kind of piggybacking off what Dionne was saying. I feel like sometimes we feel like we have to do all the work ourselves in terms of you don't always have to be like the hero who solves them the problem. Some like one of the things that I've learned this year is that you just because it's your message, you don't have to be the messenger. I learned that in terms of putting together the Weekender. Again, I'm just using an example, wanted to work with a certain brand and it was a Black woman, senior Black woman said, I can't get this over the line. I told her to let her white colleague do it. I was like, don't do it. I was like, don't carry my message. I said, do not carry it. And that was also me knowing that I shouldn't, she had been blocked. I didn't need to keep pushing her to get this through. I said, let Emma do it. And Emma got it over the line. And it was, and like, if people knew what brand it was, people would be like, oh my God, because they were very, very visible at the Weekender. As Black women, don't make other Black women also do the work and do the labor. Like I hate the word allies. I don't know why you need a title to do the right thing. I think it's stupid. I'm not going to lie. But let these allies do the work and do some of the labor. So I would say as a Black woman who wants to undo misogynoir, be honest with yourself, have that conversation with yourself. What can you actively do to undo the things that you've been taught? But also don't expect other Black women to do the labor as well, like in terms of situations, because sometimes, you know, we have senior Black women and we might talk to them and like, even I was guilty of it this week. I was talking to about policy with someone, and I had a Black woman from another organization, smaller than BB. And I was like, let me go in and like say their name and do some and like put them, you know, at the front, you know, because it shouldn't just be Black Ballad that's doing the work. You know, we should all be getting this work. And I got a little bit of pushback, and they were like, but that, and I was kind of like, why have I don't always need to put myself on the line. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm now experiencing something that I don't need to do. So don't always expect other Black women, especially older Black women who may be more senior, they've been fighting those fires for years. Like they don't have to fight your fires as well. So I would say those are things that I would say in terms of undoing the misogynoir in yourself to kind of look out for.
Powerful. Thank you so, so much. Honestly, Prudentia Wood said, the sister said Emma. Me too, I was laughing. Okay, so Ruth Ann Egan has said, how can, this is for you, Amira, how can we encourage organizations to engage with discussions around misogynoir and anti-Blackness when terms like anti-racism or misogynoir often provoke defensive reactions? What strategies would you recommend for creating an environment where these critical issues can be addressed?
Thanks for that question. I think the first thing I would say is like, it's quite interesting because when we say anti-racism being a sort of defensive term, I immediately conjure it up as a proactive term. And so it's really interesting seeing how language has a really different understanding for different people. The idea of anti-racism, I think, in and of itself, is to be proactive almost before the incident happens, before the headline takes place, right? It's about actually setting up structures and being proactive about the work that we're doing. Talk about anti-Blackness, it conjures up the same thing for me. I think actually maybe what we're talking about is the individual conversations that we have with individuals when it's almost holding someone up to the standard of being anti-racist, where we start to see that defensive response to that language. When it becomes about the individual, when it comes about the organization, what are you doing for anti-racism? What anti-racism or anti-Blackness work are you doing? And suddenly we end up in this very defensive conversation. And I'm probably going to sound a little bit pessimistic in this sense, but I genuinely believe that as long as our institutions continue to be institutionally racist, we're going to continue to get those defensive reactions. And so much of this work isn't about stopping people from being defensive. It's about getting the actual work done. And part of not being defensive, I think, is about choosing to take that educational path. And we can devote so much time to people that don't wish to be converted. We can devote all of our energy and time, et cetera, to people that aren't even listening or aren't willing to listen. And we are so much more productive when we devote time to people who either sat on the fence or people who just want the skills and the knowledge and that extra piece to actually be part of being more productive in this space. And so I think some of the strategies is devote your time and energy to what's worthwhile and what you're going to feel the benefits from. You're going to feel the love that comes out of someone that you care about or someone that you know, making that change, making those steps and making that difference. But then I also think when it comes to creating an environment, this is where like education is so important, because when we place people in institutions that encourage critical thought, when we place people in spaces where they're encouraged to debate, to discourse, to do all of these things, when they're in situations where they're almost like by expectation required to not only doubt themselves, but also put ideas forward, they are far more likely to actually engage in effective learning or see their minds changed. And this is where I think particularly where Dr. Dionne works when we're talking about the education sector, like it is so central to all of our liberation and all of the work that we're trying to do, because the moment our educational infrastructures refuse to serve our communities, we'll continue to see the same ideas reinforced and not challenged.
Absolutely. And I think with your response there, Amira, you're answering a number of questions that people are asking in terms of what kinds of actions can organizations take that aren't tokenistic. And I think actually, if you start with education, then the actions that come out from what you learn and what you find out through the research, through the data that is being collected, hopefully the actions that will come out of that will be aligned with the care and support needed for the Black women within those organizations. I think that brings us to a healthy end, even though genuinely I could speak to you all for hours. It has been the most enriching discussion I have had in a very, very long time. And I genuinely want to say a huge thank you, Dr. Dionne, Amira, Tobi. Thank you so much for your transparency, for your preparation to come and discuss in detail. I've taken so many notes today off the back of what has been shared. Thank you so much. And thank you for what you're all doing in your respective fields. Yeah, I just really wish you all the greatest success. So thank you so much. Thank you to the delegates for these great questions. I feel like you've definitely enriched the discussion we've had, and I really hope that you were also inspired by the discussion that was had today, inspired not just for inspiration's sake, but to make a change for yourself, if it is to find rest, to find a community, do something creative, like Dr. Dionne shared, read some fiction, listen to some good music, or if you're in a position of power, perhaps making a change in the organization for the benefits of those who do not have that power. And as Serena already shared, the report can be accessed online through the website. And there will be a follow-up email with the recording of this discussion here today. Please follow us on all our socials at Runnymede Trust for updates on future publications and events. We're also now on Blue Sky at runnymedetrust.bsky.social, and you can sign up to our newsletters and donate to our website. I wanted to ask for Dr. Dionne Taylor, Amira, and Tobi to share where you can be found on social media as well. So Dr. Dionne, you first. That's if you want to be found.
Yeah, no, I've only just started on LinkedIn, but it's Dionne, Dionne Taylor, Taylor, PhD. So I'm on LinkedIn. Please do contact me. I just wanted to add one thing as well, if that's okay, Dr. Lesley.
Absolutely.
But just a credit to Runnymede and for doing the work. We know it's not easy. So, and acknowledging the issue, because if we think about the starting point, it started at that feisty man saying them out to order things to Diane Abbott. So let's put that out there. There was a response, there was an acknowledgement. So credit to you guys for doing, and it is a very good report. It's a powerful report. I will be using it with my students. So credit to you. I just wanted to put that out there. I've given my socials, but also as well, we should be celebrating. Yes, there's a lot of negativity, but we should also be celebrating our achievements and how far we've come. We've still got strides to make, but it's not all negative. There are good things happening, and we just need to remember that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for that. Amira, where can you be found?
Yeah, so similarly on LinkedIn, literally just Amira Campbell, but also on Instagram, so Amira NUS Prez, and I'm all there. But I mean, yeah, echoing everything that Dionne said, thank you, Runnymede Trust, for having us and making this all happen.
Thank you. And Tobi?
When Dionne said she had socials, I was like,
old school. I'm old school.
I will be following you. So yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. It's my name, Tobi Oredein. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, I am Tobi Oredein. But other than that, Black Ballad, which is black as in the song, black's in the colour, ballads in the song, all one word, no R, UK on Instagram, LinkedIn. We're not really on Twitter anymore. But you can find us on those platforms. We talk about these issues, but also we talk about the joy of being a Black woman as well. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, Serena, that's a wrap. It was an absolute joy writing this report with you and hosting this event with you. And to everybody else, thank you again. Bye.